at the end of the day, you're a business and you need to show up and do the thing you are getting paid to do. And anything extra, it just falls outside that. It's hard to scale when you don't have that set expectation and the way you do things. And the way you do things is showing up to do jobs that are agreed upon to do. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Home Hero Podcast, where we're sharing real stories and tactics to build a practical, profitable handyman and home service business. Today, we are talking about scope creep. This is addressing when you're on site and a client is asking, oh, while you're here, can you just check out this quick little thing or do this quick little thing? It's a really common issue that can really build up to be a bigger problem, especially, I imagine, habitually, if you just get used to wavering one way or the other. So Kobe, would love to hear your thoughts on like your experiences with scope creep and how you would advise like navigating those kind of situations with clients that, you want to take care of.
Yeah. I think anybody listening to this, if you've been working in people's houses long enough, you know exactly what we're talking about. It's the tricky part about it. It's a fine line to walk between going the extra mile for your clients, your customers, especially if they're a great repeat customer. You don't want people to feel like you're nickeling and diming them all the time by just, oh, that'll be extra. And so you have to be able to balance it. But it's also very easy to get taken advantage of. And it adds up quick when these little things happen. And everybody's seen it. Just like you said, you're patching, Mary's drywall, and you wrap up and you're about to go, collect your check and ask for the review. And she's like, hey, while you're here, my gate's sagging a little bit. Do you think you could, look at it or whatever? And a lot of times it's something super quick, and it's like, yeah, let me just knock it out for you. You're a good client.
Mm.
And then other times you got to be careful, because what can happen is, the client gets used to that, and then they decide to push it a little further. It's a slippery slope. You can also get into something that's a can of worms that you're not getting paid for.
Mm.
So they're like, hey, can you take a look, my toilet's leaking, and you go to just tighten up the valve a little bit, which is a 2-minute fix. And then you break the valve off, or it's still leaking, and you can't go tell her, it's still leaking, sorry, couldn't do anything about it.
Mm.
And you end up having to make a Home Depot trip to go get a new valve, and you're there for an extra couple hours. And so super important to be conscious of what you're going to say yes to, what you're not going to say yes to, and understand if you could be opening a can of worms. And again, just making sure the homeowners, you're not heading down that slippery slope of the homeowner, just adding on more and more and more and more every time you're
Yeah.
there. There's also the liability aspect of it also. So the toilet example, toilet's leaking. Let's say you tighten up the valve and you do fix it, and cool, everybody's happy, and it took you 2 minutes. You got a happy customer you went the extra mile for. What's going to happen, a week from now? Let's say it starts leaking again. Who are they going to call? Like, hey, you did something to my toilet, it's leaking.
Mm.
Not
Yeah.
that that's going
Good
to happen
point.
every time, but something to be careful of.
Yeah, and this like the big picture topic here is that like we're businesses and we need to have really clear, transparent expectations of we're showing up to, do this drywall patch. We're not showing up to fix a leaky toilet. And that should be cleared up in your estimate and agreed upon. We know what we're here to do. And so any deviation from that most of the time is kind of a breach of that expectation. It's a breach of the agreement. And not that these things are like breaches necessarily and are disrespectful. It's natural, right? Oh, shoot, I totally forgot about this. Like I'm guilty of that with my handyman. Like, can you take a look at that? If it's an extra estimate, another job, totally cool with that. But having really crystal clear expectations because, at the end of the day, you're a business and you need to show up and do the thing are getting paid to do. And anything extra, it just falls outside that. It's hard to scale when you don't have that set expectation and the way you do things. And the way you do things is showing up to do jobs that are agreed upon to do, right? And there's always going to be some wavering there. So how did you, like in your experience, Kobe, like handle those kind of requests?
Yeah. So this kind of highlights the importance, I think, of having an agreement with every estimate you send, even if it's a repeat client. You've worked for them, a million times. You should have an estimate that you give to these people in writing that has, a contract attached. And contract sounds scary, call it an agreement, whatever you want to say, but basically outlining specifically in writing what the expectations are. And something in there should say, doesn't include scopes that aren't explicitly listed, here on this estimate. And so setting those expectations, on the front end and having those expectations in writing. And then again, it really just comes down to you have to know, whether or not you're taking on risk or added liability by doing an extra thing. If it's actually going to be, a super quick thing you can knock out to go the extra mile, because there's definitely something to be said about building trust and rapport and goodwill with people by going the extra mile for them. You just have to be careful about it. And in those events where I would choose to go the extra mile, and I left it up to my employees. Like if they ask you for something extra, these are kind of like the parameters of like, is this going to be a potential can of worms? And if you choose to go the extra mile, when I go to send the final invoice, I would add it in there as a line item. And so it would say, fix leaky toilet. And I would put in there what I would normally charge to fix a leaky toilet. And then I would add a discount below that for the amount, that it would normally cost.
Hmm.
So you're not actually charging them for them, but you're putting in writing like, hey, this is the value that you just got for free. Um, just so they're aware of what that extra mile actually looks like. Because if you have a homeowner who's they just don't know how this kind of stuff works, and so they might think like, hey, this was a 5-minute thing. It's like I'm not asking for much, but when you actually assign a dollar value, that's a legitimate dollar value you would have charged. It says to them like, oh, he did all of this extra for me. That was super nice.
Cool. So a couple things that came up there. One is like the contract. I think absolutely, like especially like remodels, larger projects, that like written, clear contract that's likely signed with a deposit. That's necessary. When we're talking about the small handyman projects, I know most handle this when you send your estimate. There's a little kind of disclaimer at the bottom, if you will, that can link to a more deeper like catch all. So that would be my recommendation for most handyman businesses to handle that. And anything larger, where it just kind of warrants that extra care into the details and expectations. That's super important as far as a written signed contract. Um, Another thing you mentioned there is this gray line of like, what request is like a super simple, easy, free value add. Um, Now, I kind of flip to the other side of that in a way where we've interviewed people on the Handyman Success podcast, and a handful of them mentioned that their job, when they're on the job, they are actively looking for these common issues that they can do for free as just a value add. Like for example, like a squeaky door, carrying around some WD-40, tightening up some like some screws like in the drawer or something like that, or the hardware in the bathroom. So on the flip side, there is a really good customer experience, like a positive customer experience one could exhibit by being proactive on the common stuff. Um, so how would you relationally, because it's hard when people ask you, oh, can you check this out for me, or do you mind fixing this up real quick? Whenever it does fall outside of that scope of like, this is a separate job, separate estimate, um, like how like how do you navigate that with the client? If something, where's the cutoff of like, oh, it's going to just be a couple minutes, it's going to be 5 minutes, it's going to be 10 minutes. Like how would you handle that relationally with the client, like verbally addressing that? And then what are your thoughts too on like what are those examples where you could certainly be more willing to consider doing it versus like that's too much what they're asking me to look at here.
Yeah, it's always tough. You get that whether you're a business owner or not, you get that social pressure when somebody's asking you to do something, saying no or saying sure, but for more money. Like it never feels good to do that. You just want to say yes. You just want to do it, even if it's something you don't
Mm-hmm.
actually want to do. Um, and the answer is it's difficult. And a lot of the times, I'd say most of the time, when a customer asks you to do a small thing, it actually is a small thing. Like, hey, this door's squeaky. I mean, it takes you again literally 5 minutes to pop out the hinges and put some WD-40 in there, and you fix the door, and they're happy. And there's totally, absolutely, 100% real value in doing those little things that don't take you much time, that mean a lot to the customer for free, with
Mm-hmm.
nothing hanging over their head. You're not holding it against them or anything like that. No strings attached. There's definitely value there. And where you draw the line, I mean, it really comes down to, I think it comes down to where you are in your business. So, for example, even if it's a super quick thing, if you've got a job you've got to get to that's 30 minutes away, and it's you got to be there in 35 minutes, you're kind of close. But like, hey, Mary, I'm sorry, I really got to get to the next project. I don't have time to do that today. Next time I'm here, I'll take care of
Mm-hmm.
you. So, and especially early on, I think you have to, if you're not, if you already don't have enough work, you're really trying to build up your client base. Doing some of that early on can really help, again, build that trust as you're establishing the business. And so you might move that line a little bit further back and say, I'll do a little bit more extra as I'm trying to establish myself. But then on the flip side of that same coin, as your business grows, you get more established, and you're like, well, I moved the line forward again. I'm not doing that kind of stuff for free anymore. When Mary asks you for the same thing, it's like, well, you did it for me last time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's a tough question to answer, because it's just a tough thing to navigate in your business. But at the end of the day, you just have to decide, again, am I opening a can of worms if I do this, being able to identify that. So I'd say anything that involves plumbing, if somebody's like, hey, can you take a look at anything plumbing related? Probably not for free, because that's always a
Mm-hmm.
can of worms. And it's kind of like if you go to the grocery store and you're buying, a bag of chips, you're not going to go to the cash register and be like, hey, by the way, since I'm here, do you think you could throw in a second bag of chips for me?
That's bold.
Yeah, like it's like you can go grab one off the shelf and you can pay for it, right?
Yeah.
And so again, it's definitely a dichotomy. You have to be able to balance building goodwill, going the extra mile for your clients, and taking care of people,
Mm-hmm.
and not being taken advantage of. Because at the end of the day, you're a business, and you're doing it to make money and provide for your family, and
Mm-hmm.
you can still take care of your clients. But you have to draw the line somewhere.
Yeah, and what you said there about the chips reminded me of there was this business kind of video I watched years ago when I was first starting, and it was kind of on the subject of kind of giving too much and or someone asking too much and how you approach that. And it's this guy, he's at a fast food restaurant, and you go up and you get a drink refill. Oh, can I get a refill? I'll get some Dr. Pepper or whatever. And he goes up to the counter, and he's like, yeah, can I get a burger refill? And like it was just a funny video where the employee was like, a burger refill? Like, yeah, I finished my burger and I'd like a refill on my burger.
Yeah.
And it's just a funny, cute video. And one of the employees went, let me ask my manager
Right.
if I can get this burger refill. So kind of zooming back out here, uh, one of the big takeaways for me from our conversation so far, Kobe, is there's going to be a difference between owner operator and someone with employees. My encouragement for people with employees is address this in a positive company culture. For example, there was a large local plumbing company called Bonnie's Plumbing or Bonnie's Home Services in Sacramento, California area, and their culture, their technicians, even though they're showing up for a plumbing job or doing an HVAC tune up, if they saw something in the house, not even in the house, like just something that they could help with their experience, expertise, usually is little small home fixes, fixing some squeaky, cupboards, doors, etc. I saw this one social post where a guy helped somebody with his vehicle, something with his car. Um, And that was their culture of going above and beyond for their clients, even though they're just there for a little HVAC tune up. They were, is part of their culture to have those eyeballs, those glasses on to look for how can I go above and beyond for this person. And that comes down to culture and who you're hiring and how you're really pouring into them so that they positively are doing this on behalf of your company. So that would be my encouragement for anyone with employees. And of course, just drawing those clear boundaries of black and white of what's acceptable, what's not, as far as time or plumbing, for example, is just a no go. Um, Now, owner operator, it's very different because you have a more personal relationship with people that you're talking. You talk to them about the estimate, you talk to them on the job. A an idea that I would have for addressing scope creep for owner operators is this is just a cool idea I saw recently. Is creating a note, whether it's Apple, Google, and sharing it with your client for little to do lists around the house. And they can add little things that they won't forget, they'll remember, and it goes into the list. You could set it up so you actually get notified. So if you're an owner operator and something like that is feasible, you work with a really nice group of core clients, just work on referrals, et cetera. That's a really manual, personal touch that I think is a little bit harder to scale unless you have an office manager that can keep up with these lists and reaching out to people and it builds up. But that is a potential solution for scope creep for the owner operator. It is more personal, but it kind of is a way to capture those little items that pile up. Also, it could be solved with a notepad, a sticker magnet notepad that someone can write all their little items to capture those. So next time you're there, you can help them with those little things that are easy to be like, hey, Kobe, I forgot about this. Can you take a look at that? It just should be a few minutes. Uh,
Yeah.
so those are some bigger takeaways too, as far as the different kind of business that might be out there listening. What any other thoughts that you have on scope creep or encouragement you'd have, Kobe?
Well, that last thing you said about sharing Apple Notes or whatever. So if you got an iPhone, you can do it with Google, I'm sure too, or Android. But an iPhone, I can share a note with a homeowner, and we can both add things onto this note, and it populates kind of like a Google Doc that's shared with somebody or whatever. And so my project manager, this just reminded me, my project manager, he used to with all of our clients, and this was when we were doing remodels. He would start a note and he would share it with the client, and the client would add some of their punch list stuff on there. Like if anybody's done remodels, even handyman stuff, I'm sure you had the client that goes and they put little bits of masking tape all over, like the little spots of paint on the wall and things that need touched up, and you're like, I'm gonna get to it, we're not done yet. And so my project manager would share this a note with the homeowner, and he would type in there, here's all the punch list stuff we've identified, and that says to the homeowner, hey, we're gonna get to this, so you don't have to
Mhm.
go get your masking tape. And so identifying before the homeowner does, there's some things that need fixed, shows we're paying attention, we care. And then the homeowner would then go and add things that maybe we didn't have on the list, and they just they feel a little bit more at ease. And then if there's some of the smaller things they'd added in there, and so that's a great idea. But in even if you're not an owner operator, like you can still do that. Again, that was my project manager that was doing that, and that was his idea. It was a great idea. But as far as scope creep goes, none of this is to say that you shouldn't go the extra mile for your customers, and you should be looking around and identifying, like, hey, where can I go the extra
Mhm.
mile? Not looking around like, hey, by the way, your door is squeaky, $50 to fix your door or whatever. Just if you identify something like that and you have the time, it's low risk, low liability, and it's a good client you want to take care of, like, just do it for them.
Mhm.
It goes such a long, 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 long way with building. That's the type of client, when you do things like that for them, they're going to refer you to other people.
Yeah.
And so the effects of it are exponential, but you just have to know, like, where that line is, and you have to kind of set it in your head ahead of time. And I mean, really set it in an agreement, setting the expectation with the customer. But knowing where the line is and not negotiating with yourself, you're like, man, I said I wouldn't go fix toilets anymore because every time it's a can of worms, and then you do it anyways because you can't say no,
Yeah.
which
Very
is
true.
tough. And the scope creep is, I think it tends to be a lot more noticeable in the larger projects, the remodels, and
Mhm. Yeah.
and things
See
like that.
that.
We had a client who, we did their kitchen, and this is like a, $60,000 kitchen remodel. And we did the flooring in the kitchen. We put a transition strip in, and she's like, well, now, I kind of want the transition strips in the rest of the house to match. Do you think you
Mm-hmm.
could do that? And so my project manager went and bought all the new transition strips, and we put them in, and, it took, maybe an extra 3 hours on a, a $60,000 project. It seems like a small thing, but those little things really tend to
Absolutely.
add up.
Yeah.
So it's just something to pay attention to. But again, don't lose your heart, and you're doing this. You want to take care of people. You
Mm.
should take care of people and go the extra mile. You just have to keep in mind, you also have to take care of yourself and your business and your family, employees, if you have them. And so sometimes it can come down to like, okay, if I'm being nice to this client, am I taking away from, my family, from my
Hmm.
employees? And that's an extreme example, but
Yeah. Yeah. There's a difference between being nice and being good. I think good is a more reasonable, tempered approach of what's fair and right. And my biggest encouragement for our listeners here today is you should seek to go above and beyond, because at the end of the day, whether you have the heart to do that or not, um, the you want to have a service that's a premium service that appeals to a premium clientele, and premium clients want to pay premium rates. uh, that's the level of service that maybe they don't expect that above and beyond, but it's that level that's going to really affirm that you're a great option, that you're totally worth the cost for professional handyman services. So it's a worthwhile endeavor to be on the lookout for these things, but with good guard and guardrails around the yes and the no's.
yeah, yeah. And I think last thing I'll say about it is, if you're struggling to identify where that line might be, kind of think, if I do this, I'm adding value to the homeowner, but am I also taking value away
Mm-hmm.
from me, my business, or my family, my employees?
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're taking from one to give to the other, you might be net negative, and maybe that's where the line is. If you can do the nice thing for the homeowner, and you're not losing out on, um, anything from the business, or your family, your take home pay, anything like that, then you should absolutely do it.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Yeah, it's okay to say no, guys, and it's also okay to go above and beyond with the right expectations. Great conversation, Kobe. If anyone out there has any questions or other thoughts on scope creep, we'd love to hear it. Any specific questions that you'd like to hear our thoughts on from me and Kobe, let us know. Drop us a comment. This is truly, we're here to help and lift up the industry.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Home Hero Podcast, brought to you by Handyman Marketing Pros.